Welcome to the Roberts Law Office Injury Podcast. Kentucky attorney Jeff Roberts has over 25 years of experience. He'll provide answers to your questions related to personal injury and automobile accidents, workers' compensation claims, and Social Security disability benefits. Let's join Jeff for this episode. And welcome to this episode. We're here with Jeff Roberts, and today we're going to discuss motorcycles, motorcycle collisions, motorcycle accidents, and issues that come along with that. But you're going to notice a little difference when Jeff joins us here. We are still dealing with the COVID-19 coronavirus issue, and because we're kind of locked down and not able to be in the same studio together, Jeff has graciously agreed to participate via phone. So you're going to hear a little bit difference in the mics, and we apologize for that up front, but we're all just trying to comply and make the best of what we got. Hey, Jeff, welcome. I appreciate you showing up, buddy.
You're welcome. It's good to be here, Jim.
Absolutely. Hey, we're going to talk about motorcycles, and the fact is, as a personal injury attorney, you've got a great view of this because you've ridden bikes for years.
Yes, I have. I actually was riding street bikes, and statute of limitations expired now, so I can say it, but I was riding street bikes even before I had my driver's license, and first vehicle that I ever purchased was a motorcycle, so I've ridden motorcycles pretty much my whole life.
Yeah. Well, one of the things, in the previous episode, we actually spent quite a bit of time talking about various insurance coverages, and we talked about this personal injury coverage or PIP coverage, or sometimes it's just commonly referred to as no fault. And that's great if you're in a car. You've got automatic insurance to cover, up to $10,000 worth of medical bills and things like that. But on a motorcycle, that situation is different. I think that catches a lot of people by surprise. Do you want to take us through that?
Yes, I will. In the previous episode, I'd mentioned that the PIP coverage or no-fault coverage is mandatory coverage, at least a minimum limit of $10,000, and that's in regard to a car or a truck that's out on the roadway. It's actually different in regard to a motorcycle. A lot of the other mandatory coverages are still the same, but in regard to the motorcycle, PIP coverage is optional coverage, so you have to actually purchase that and tell them you want that additional coverage. And a lot of times when you're obtaining your motorcycle insurance, I know from my own personal experience, when I was obtaining it, they wouldn't even mention the PIP coverage and ask if I wanted the PIP coverage for my motorcycle coverage. I would have to actually tell them I want to make sure this does have PIP coverage. I want PIP coverage on this policy there to make sure that it protected me if I was involved in a collision, and you want to make sure you've got passenger PIP coverage. And I see that more frequently on policies anyway, where the PIP coverage is just a passenger PIP coverage. So if you're riding, if you're driving your motorcycle and you've got a passenger riding with you and you're involved in a collision, then the passengers would have PIP coverage up to $10,000 or whatever the limits are that you've purchased of the passenger PIP coverage, but it's only going to cover the passenger in that situation, and it's not going to cover you. So your medical bills, if you don't have health insurance, are going to come out of your pocket, and your lost wages, unless you have short-term disability, you're not going to get any compensation for your lost wages. And there's another drawback or penalty, basically, if you don't have that PIP coverage on your motorcycle. And part of the no-fault law is that the injured person, their ability to recover that first $10,000 of medical and the first $10,000 of combination medical and lost wages, I should say, the person that they can recover that against is their own insurance for the vehicle they're in. You do not recover that from the at-fault driver, and if you don't have PIP coverage, you basically waive that first $10,000 of medical and or lost wages, and you're not able to recover that first $10,000 from the at-fault driver's insurance at all. So you give up that claim, and if you don't have that coverage, then you're just out of luck.
Well, and that's the thing. I think a lot of people get surprised because maybe I've got a car or a couple of cars and just bought a motorcycle, and I'm just going to assume I'm covered. That's not always the case either, right?
It is not the case. In fact, most automobile insurance policies will have a specific provision in there that it only covers the vehicles that are mentioned in the declarations page, and a lot of insurance policies will specifically say that they do not cover motorcycles. There's some insurance companies that will not write motorcycle coverage at all, and those policies specifically say they do not cover a motorcycle, and even you'll see some that says they don't cover any other vehicle you own unless it's insured with that company. So if you've got, and I'm not saying Kentucky Farm Bureau does this because I don't know, but I'm just using them as an example. If you've got Kentucky Farm Bureau covering your car and you own a truck that's insured with someone else, it's not going to cover that truck, obviously. And if you have a motorcycle, it's not going to cover that motorcycle. It's got to be the coverage that you purchased for that vehicle.
Wow. And again, as we said in the previous episode, so many of the cases you handle ultimately really come down to what's the amount of insurance that's actually available, regardless of whether it's the at-fault driver or maybe some uninsured, underinsured coverage that you may be covering. It really comes down to that. And as you said in the previous episode, one of the most, I guess, heart-wrenching discussions you have to have is when somebody has significant medical bills and there's just no more money.
That's exactly correct. And it's no more, I mean, the most important situation I see from that needs to make sure they have the underinsured and the uninsured motorist coverage at good limits, high limits to protect themselves are motorcycles. Yeah. Because when you're involved in a collision between two cars, you've got a lot of metal between you and the other vehicle, or you got a lot of safety equipment between you and the other vehicle, airbags, seat belts, things of that nature. And in my experience, in a motorcycle collision with a motor vehicle, the motorcyclist generally, if there's going at any kind of speed whatsoever, the motorcyclist has significant injuries, and the at-fault driver may have minimum limits of $25,000, yep. And it's not going to take very much in medical treatment to exceed $25,000, especially when you have someone who has multiple broken bones or other injuries that you frequently see in motorcycle collisions.
Well, that could be a loss of a limb. That could be a head injury. It could be a whole bunch of things that really, really require a lot of extensive medical treatment, rehab, and somebody's got to pay for that. But if the insurance isn't there, I mean, that's a tough conversation.
It is, and that's just, I mean, that's the nature of the beast with motorcycles. Is like we said earlier, I've ridden all my life pretty much, or most of my adult life anyway, from that standpoint. And it's, to me, it's very, I love the feeling of riding a motorcycle, and it's something that the people who ride generally love it, and it's their favorite form of transportation. But there is a drawback if you're in a collision, because you tend to have much more serious injuries.
Yeah. Let's kind of switch gears here and move away from the motorcyclist to actually the car driver, who may be the person involved in this collision with a motorcycle, and some of the common causes of collisions. Because I guess once they lift the travel bans and all the other issues related to this coronavirus, we're going to get out on the road. I mean, we're going to want to get out. We're going to want to hit the roads and drive and kind of maybe go down to the lake or do something that we haven't been able to do for a while. And there's a lot of things that we're just not thinking about. And the problem with a motorcycle is you may not see them on the road. Do you want to kind of talk about, in your career anyway, some of the more common issues that you've kind of seen happen in terms of collisions that involve motorcycles?
Yes, and after doing this for 27 plus years now, I've handled a lot of motorcycle collisions and talked to a lot of people involved in motorcycle wrecks, and it's nearly always the the car driver that is the cause of the wreck. Rarely is it the motorcycle operator that's the cause of the wreck. And what you frequently see is just, frankly, inattention on the part of the car driver. They will just, they don't look, and especially this time of the year, and whenever we start traveling again after the coronavirus lockdown is completely over with, your drivers aren't used to looking for motorcyclists through the wintertime, and so in the springtime and when it starts warming up and we start seeing motorcyclists on the roadway, the drivers, when they're stopping and ready to pull out, they don't take the time to look as closely as they should be looking for it, and then they'll pull out in front of a motorcyclist, or in what you'll see at times is, they'll ride really, really close to if they're driving behind a motorcyclist, they'll ride really close to the rear end of the motorcycle. I see cars frequently give much more distance between themselves and another car in front of them than they do a motorcyclist in front of them, and you don't need to tailgate a motorcyclist at all, because at least my experience is a motorcycle can brake fairly quickly, and cars take a little bit longer to slow down because they have a lot more weight that they're trying to stop from that standpoint. So give the motorcyclist a little bit more room from there. And, if you're getting ready to make a left-hand turn on the roadway, make sure looking ahead of you and make sure there's not a motorcycle coming that you're going to turn right in front of, because most of my wrecks that I see are somebody that pulls out from a side road in front of a motorcyclist, or they turn left in front of a motorcyclist coming down the road that they just didn't see because they weren't looking like they should have been looking.
I tell you, coming back to the tailgating issue, there's not a person out there who's driven for any period of time who hasn't seen a tractor trailer get right up on your bumper, and it makes you nervous. You obviously know that tractor trailer is going to take a lot longer, to slow down than your car. It's the same thing when you're on top of a motorcyclist.
Yes.
I mean,
yes,
it's really,
exactly it is.
Yeah, and it's just we've all been there. We've all seen the blood pressure go up when you're seeing that big grill come up in your rearview mirror there. Motorcycle is going to have the exact same, and with a lot less protection than you got. That asphalt's hard.
That's true.
Jeff, let's talk about some of the damages here when you're dealing with a motorcyclist. I mean, obviously you've got property damage. That bike is probably gonna, if that bike's had to lay down, it's got extensive property damage there. But more importantly than the property damage, you've got extensive medical bills, and you kind of touched on this earlier. But I mean, these aren't just normal medical bills that a car driver might have. I mean, some of these are going to be seriously catastrophic, leading up to wrongful death, and possibly even something I'd love you to talk about a little bit, because people don't know about this, a loss of consortium claim. Can you kind of walk us through that, and kind of, again, another reason to be mindful that you're sharing the road?
Yes, as I said earlier, the motorcyclists tend to have significant or more significant injuries than motor vehicle occupants do. Now, that's not always the case. People in motor vehicles have very serious injuries and can suffer brain injuries and even die in the collisions. I've handled more of those than I care to have, but because they occur fairly regularly from that standpoint. But the motorcyclist, it seems to occur obviously much more significantly. And if you have a significant physical injury on behalf of the rider of the motorcycle or a passenger on the motorcycle, then and you're correct, a lot of people don't realize this, but the spouse could potentially have a loss of consortium claim. Loss of consortium is a loss of love and affection that is there. If a person dies as a result of a motorcycle accident, then the spouse could have that claim in addition to the claim of the wrongful death claim for the person who died, and or if you have a very, very significant physical injury to the individual, that can actually lead to a potential loss of consortium claim as well.
And it's not only a spouse, but don't children also have a potential claim for loss of consortium?
Minor children, yes.
Minor children,
if you have minor children, if you have minor children, then they could have a potential claim for a loss of consortium. And Kentucky does not yet, anyway, recognize an adult child's loss of consortium claim.
Right, but in dealing with these, I mean, just normal trips to the ER are going to be thousands of dollars. But now, if you've got spinal trauma, you've got head trauma, you've got multiple surgeries going on, specialists from everywhere. These bills are going to be enormous. And again, this comes back to having the right insurance, but at the same time, you don't want to be the person that's responsible for those catastrophic injuries, because mistakes happen, but there's also an accountability factor. And I suppose you've dealt with that many times over the years.
Yes, and the medical bills can be extremely high in these type of cases. I've had incidences where my client that was a motorcyclist that was injured in an accident, their medical bills exceeded $200,000, and some that's even gone over $400,000 of medical bills for the injuries that they've received. And that's just up until the time the claim resolves, either by settlement or trial, but they're going to have future medical treatment going on for, a lot of them are going to have future medical treatment for the rest of their lives because of the type of injuries that they've suffered in these type of collisions. So, working through that process and making sure that the person is taken care of and is that the medical bills are taken care of, and trying to make sure that they've got a stream of income coming in for the rest of their life if they're not able to go back to work, is all things that the attorney who's representing them needs to try to make sure they're accomplishing to the best of the ability for the individual.
Well, you mentioned some of these extensive medical treatments that are going to last the rest of their life. I mean, you've got to bring in some people who can help calculate that type of cost of care, right? I mean, when you're dealing with this, obviously these are complex cases, and again, I guess knowing the right, and I guess we could say expert in this, knowing the right experts and planning experts to bring in is going to be very, very important to that injured family.
Oh, absolutely. If you're handling these type of cases, and it's good if you're talking to an attorney about, if you've been injured or you've had a family member that's been injured in a motorcycle collision, one of the things you want to talk to the attorney when you're talking to them initially is about that, and make sure that they know and that they're already prepared to bring in an expert who can project the medical expenses over that person's lifetime, if it's appropriate for the type of injury that the person has received, that they know the proper expert, economist or vocational expert to quantify for a jury or for the insurance company the vocational losses that the person has suffered and the economic impact that the injury is going to have on that individual and on the entire family, to make sure that you're presenting all of the damages to the insurance company initially for trying to resolve the claim, but if you have to, then to the jury to make sure you're getting the full compensation for your client. And again, that's where it's good to make sure if you own a motorcycle that you have really, really good underinsured and uninsured motorist limits to cover your damages in those settings. Hopefully the at-fault driver is going to have good coverage, but having that underinsured motorist or the uninsured motorist is very, very beneficial to protect you and protect your family if you're a motorcycle operator. Well,
and I hope you don't mind my raising this point, but obviously we mentioned the reason we're remote today is because of this whole coronavirus. One of the things that people are probably not necessarily thinking about is that, people are worried about keeping their jobs. They're worried about being able to pay bills, put food on the table for their families. And so part of that process is cutting expenses. And it's not inconceivable that there might be a few people out there driving with, the cheapest possible coverage available, or even no coverage just because they can't afford it and that policy's lapsed, but they've still got to get around and take care of life. And so when you talk about that uninsured, underinsured, this is on the insurance policy, that UM/UIM coverage that you might see. That's even more important, I think, in the next year or so, just until this economy kind of gets straightened out.
Yeah, I agree with you. There's the number of people that are going to be on unemployment instead of be receiving a paycheck is going up. We've already seen that and have seen that occur now, and the unemployment benefits aren't, as a general rule, or nowhere near what you normally earn in your paycheck. So people are going to have to cut back on things, and frankly, insurance is one of the things that you see people cut back. They don't really think about the value of the insurance. It's something that people think that they can do without, because they're never going to be in a wreck. They're never going to cause an accident, until they do, exactly. So I suspect you are 100% correct. We're going to be seeing more and more insurances lapse in the next several months because of the economic impact from this coronavirus.
Yeah, and that's not people doing this on purpose. These are hard decisions, and I could feed my family, or I could change my insurance, or maybe catch it back up later. I think people are going to have to be forced with making real life decisions, and that very well could be one of them. Jeff, if I ride a motorcycle and I go out and I say, okay, I want my PIP coverage, so I'm going to pay a little bit more on my policy to get my motorcycle, my passenger covered. I might even increase my UM/UIM, all of that coverage as well. What if I'm driving out of state? Let's say I decide to run down to Nashville. How does the insurance work when I'm in a different state?
Since the insurance was purchased in Kentucky, then you'd still have the exact same insurance coverages that here, because it's a contract claim. So you're still covered from that standpoint. The going down into Tennessee is not going to change that, or going to any other state is not going to change the coverage that you have on your vehicle from that standpoint. So that coverage follows you if you travel. Now, if you move, that's one thing. If you move out of state and you need to change your coverage to the state that you're living in after a period of time. You've got obviously a grace period there to do that. But if you've permanently changed your address, one of the things that companies can do, and I don't think they've really been that successful, but there's no sense in having the fight with your insurance company in a time when you don't need to be fighting with them. You just need them to be cooperating with you. Is that this person moved out of state, and we didn't know they moved out of state, so we shouldn't have to provide coverage in this situation, because we wouldn't have written the policy in Tennessee, so we shouldn't have to cover this accident. And again, I don't know that it would be that successful, but why fight it if you change your insurance to the state you're in?
Well, sure, I would imagine that grace period is not 2 years. It's probably
no, definitely not 2 years. I think you'd have a couple of months to do that, and frankly, at least I would hope most insurance companies wouldn't give you a fight if it's within a couple of months. But if you've been there a year and you hadn't, and you've mailed your insurance payment back to Kentucky for that because you think Kentucky's insurance rates are cheaper than Tennessee's rates, then you might have a problem.
Yeah, and it's this is not a time to start gaming the system when it comes down to the insurance is actually going to protect you and your family.
Absolutely correct.
It's just some of these things that we got to do. But Jeff, you've handled a fair number of these motorcycle accidents over the last 27 years, almost 30 years now. What how do you deal with the family? I mean, these things. I mean, you've got one of those jobs that I know a lot of people look at attorneys and they have their own opinions, but you're forced with sitting down across the table with the family. How do you approach those conversations?
Well, it's never easy. It would to sit down and talk with someone. So if they've lost a loved one, that's the most difficult conversation. But even if they're facing how am I going to pay how are we going to pay our bills this month? We got a mortgage payment. We got a car payment due. and we don't have any income coming in. Those type of conversations aren't fun to have with anyone from there. But after you've been, and I think my conversations with my clients now is much better than it was when I started practicing 1992, however many years ago that is. After doing this for as many years as I have, I've learned what works and what doesn't work and what can help and what can't help. So, as I've mentioned, I think in a previous podcast, one of the things is to make sure we preserve, if there is PIP coverage on the motorcycle, preserve that coverage to pay lost wages. And I see, especially on a motorcycle, in a motorcycle accident, that's extremely important to do early on. It's extremely important to get an attorney that knows what they're doing in a motorcycle accident case involved on your side very, very early on, because the emergency room bill in and of itself is probably going to exceed the $10,000 of PIP coverage, or it's going to be real, real close to that if it doesn't exceed that. And so having the attorney notify your insurance company, preferably before there's ever been an application for the PIP coverage filed, and let them know we want to reserve 100% of that money to pay lost wages. Again, unfortunately, Kentucky caps the lost wages at $200 a week, but $200 a week coming in is better than $0 a week coming in. If the PIP can pay that, frankly, they know they're going to be out that full $10,000 whenever there's a motorcycle wreck. They're pretty well guaranteed they're going to be out that $10,000 of PIP coverage. And the quicker they can get that there and shut that claim down and move to the next one, frankly, I think the insurance companies prefer that to some extent. They prefer not to pay any money out, but if they're going to pay it out and they know they're going to pay it all out, the quicker they can close that file out and move on to something else is what they want to do. And I have them all the time contact me saying, well, we've got all these medical bills that's going to exhaust coverage. Don't you want us to go ahead and do that? Like, no, I want to reserve it to take care of my client's lost wages. The hospital can wait a little bit on getting paid, or they can bill the health insurance and get paid through the health insurance, and then we'll reimburse the health insurance later. But my client doesn't have any other source of income, so I'm taking care of my client, and we'll let the hospital take care of the hospital, and I'll take care of the hospital later on. And so it's extremely important in a motorcycle wreck that you get into an attorney that knows what they're doing, an attorney that concentrates in personal injury, and preferably an attorney that has experience in motorcycle wrecks and operating a motorcycle, because I think having operated a motorcycle for years and years, I'm familiar with the process. I know how motorcycles operate. I know what drivers do. And one of the things that's going to occur in every motorcycle case, regardless if the person turns left in front of the motorcyclist, or they pull out in front of the motorcyclist from an inferior road, the insurance company is going to try to find some reason to blame the motorcyclist. And so having someone that's familiar with how motorcycles operate is vital in making sure that you're getting the proper value and getting compensated what you should be getting compensated for the injuries and damages that you've suffered.
Well, I think that was an interesting statement you just made, is that they're going to assume it was the motorcyclist's fault. I mean, we've all seen that. We've seen a bike go screaming down the road or on the highway and pass you up, and you wonder, what's that guy thinking? But a lot of these cases, that's not what happened. And so you're dealing with that prejudice there of, hey, no, my guy's not at fault here. And being able to really lay out that case, especially with your experience having ridden, bikes for so long.
Right, exactly, and you'll see that. And when you see a motorcycle, if you're not familiar with a motorcycle, and if you just see a motorcycle going down the road, you're standing in your yard and a motorcycle passes by, and then a car passes by 5 minutes later, if they're going the exact same speed, if you ask the person, 90% of the time they will tell you that the motorcyclist was going faster just because they're smaller and people think they're moving faster than what they are really moving. And then, as a motorcyclist, people think, well, you can maneuver those quickly, and you can maneuver them to some extent, but when you're going, if you're on a highway at 55 mile an hour, you can't just maneuver on a dime in that setting. Otherwise, you're going to wreck by trying. You can't make a sharp turn when you're going 55 mile an hour. And so that is, people think that they're a little more agile than they are. From that, you can maneuver them. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that they're not maneuverable, but there are limitations to how sharp you can maneuver the vehicle.
Well, the laws of physics are constant. That doesn't change.
If you try to defy the laws of physics, you're probably going to pay the price.
Yeah, I would think so. Well, Jeff, It has been a pleasure. I really was looking forward to this episode because, again, you do have a background as a motorcyclist. You have handled many of these cases, including some of the most catastrophic and cases resulting in death, obviously. This is a complicated kind of collision to deal with. And the one thing I really like about you is you're a trial lawyer. I mean, you love being out there doing this. Not all of these things go to trial, but when it does, it's awful nice to know that you've not only got an attorney on your side, you've got a trial lawyer who knows his way or her way around the courtroom and how to present this information effectively. I've got an immense amount of respect for you, buddy, and I hope all this clears up with the coronavirus and people can kind of get back out on the road. It'll be nice, but I think there's going to be a lot of distractions. I think people are going to be challenged financially, and I think there's going to be a lot of risk. So this might be a good time, to probably pick up the phone and talk to your insurance agent and just ask them, well, if I am planning on riding a bike, and what's my coverage? How am I sitting? Hopefully you're in the position to be able to make some good decisions now before you really, really need them or wish you had.
Absolutely, because you can't go back and say after the collision, you can't go say, oh, I want to add this coverage and backdate it to the date of the collision. It doesn't work that way.
It doesn't work that way at all. Jeff, I wish you the best, my friend. We'll be back in about 2 weeks, but that's a wrap here for episode 4 dealing with motorcycle collisions. And once again, Jeff, thanks for your time. We'll talk to you in 2.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to the Roberts Law Office Injury Podcast. Jeff will return in 2 weeks. Until then, he invites you to visit jeffrobertslaw.com and follow his firm on Facebook. At the Roberts Law Office, you'll find a history of small town service and big city results.